I only ordered for family. The words hung in the air, light and airy, yet they landed on me with the weight of a hammer. My mother-in-law, Carol, smiled as she said it, a saccharine curve of her lips that made my aunt, Sharon, look at me with a question in her eyes. "Why did you get no steak or dessert?" she had asked, her voice a gentle prod into the tense silence. That's when the blade of Carol's quiet cruelty finally sliced through me. I turned to my husband, David, and felt the words escape me before I could stop them. "Am I family or not?" He didn't look at me, he just chewed slowly, deliberately. A piece of glistening filet mignon. The table fell silent, not in comfortable anticipation of a response, but in the kind of shocked hush that precedes a storm. "My name is Maria, and I've been married to David for 7 years. I used to think that meant something. We met at a Saturday book club, a quiet, predictable start to what I thought would be a quiet, predictable life. I was an accounting officer at a local supermarket chain, working full-time since I was 18, putting myself through trade school and building a life with my own 2 hands. David was still in graduate school, full of quiet admiration for my ambition. "You're incredible," he'd say. "Working full-time while I'm just writing policy memos makes me feel lazy." I'd smile, feeling seen, feeling valued. I thought it meant we were a team. When he got a job as a budget analyst at the city clerk's office, we moved into a modest rental just outside the city. And that's when I met his family. They weren't just a family, they were a fortress. And I was the unwelcome visitor at the gate. Carol wore her Chanel perfume like a crown of judgment. Tom shook my hand as if he expected a payment in return, and his sister Lindsay, 2 years older than David, had never worked a day in her life, and was so proud of it she wore the fact like a badge of honor. Carol's first words to me after a long, silent scan were, "Oh, I thought you'd be taller." Tom followed with, "So, Maria, you didn't go to college." The word didn't was soaked in pity, a deliberate attempt to shrink me. I didn't flinch. I had bills at 18 and made my choices I never regretted until they made me feel like I was constantly justifying my existence. For a while, David defended me. He would say, "She works harder than anyone I know. My parents can be a little much, but don't take it personally." At first, I didn't not. I smiled politely when Carol brought overpriced pastries just for David, ignoring my store-brand coffee as if it were poison. But over time, the snubs multiplied. The compliments from David stopped, and his defenses faded into a quiet, complicit silence. "She doesn't even manage investments." I overheard Tom whisper once after Carol, somehow, got a hold of my payslip. "So little savings and no portfolio," Carol said to David after snooping through my bank ledger, which she'd pulled out of my drawer. "You should have married someone with at least a financial plan." Every snide remark, every disapproving glance, was a small death by 1,000 cuts. Yet I still tried. I cooked, I cleaned, I smiled, I poured drinks. One Christmas, I received a re-gifted candle while everyone else got tailored gifts with cards. No one noticed, not even David. By our 6th year, I began to see our marriage for what it had become. I was the hired help with a marriage license. Still, I held on. We didn't have children, but we had history, and I foolishly hoped that with time, things would get better. That hope kept me walking into their home, head up even as my heart sank. Last summer, Carol told me to pack for a family getaway to a lakeside cabin. I drove with David to his parents' place, only for them to leave without me while I was in the restroom. Just gone. David later told me, "Mom said it should be just family." He said it like it was a fact, not a deep personal insult. "But I'm your wife," I said, a tremor in my voice. "Yeah," he replied, "but you're not blood." The words cut deeper than he knew. Or maybe he did know, and just didn't care. That memory came crashing back now. As I looked at the empty space on the table where my plate of steak should have been, I had been drafted into service for this annual family lunch up at 6 a.m., dusting, chopping, ironing, and reheating. David and his parents sipped espresso on the patio while I ironed linen napkins. I was wiped, my arms ached, my back throbbed. When I quietly asked David to help me carry out the roast, he muttered, "You're doing fine." Finally, I allowed myself to sit down as food was being passed around. That's when Carol stood. I have a surprise, she said with a saccharine smile. Just for family. She returned with a tray of 7 perfect glistening filet mignons and a glossy white box of imported French tarts, handing them one by one to everyone but me. Silence descended. Aunt Sharon's question was the pin that burst the bubble of pretense. Carol, didn't you make one for Maria? Carol looked at me as if I was gum stuck under her heel. I only ordered for family, she said lightly, almost a whisper, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. My ears rang, my chest burned. David finally set his fork down, and his eyes met mine for a fleeting second. Not with remorse, but with a familiar mix of annoyance and exasperation. Don't do this, Maria. Not here. His voice was a low mutter, barely audible over the hum of polite chatter. He was still chewing. I looked at the 7 plates of steak, then at my half-eaten chicken. The silence wasn't a crack in the glass. It was a total collapse. It was a silence that confirmed everything I had known for 7 years. I was not family. And I was tired of pretending. Oh, I think this is exactly the place, I said, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. My hands, however, were trembling under the table, a stark contrast to my steady voice. Carol gave a sharp little laugh, a sound like glass breaking. Honestly, this is so beneath you, Maria. Making a scene over food. Food? I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. No, Carol. This isn't about steak or desserts. This is about being treated like an outsider for 7 years, like a tenant in your son's life, like the hired help you all never wanted but were happy to exploit. Tom scoffed, his face turning red. No one ever said you weren't welcome. No, I countered, leaning forward slightly. You just said I wasn't educated, not polished, not family material. You said it with every side eye, every backhanded compliment. Every time you went through my private things looking for reasons to belittle me. My eyes darted to Carol, then back to Tom. I'm not a passive witness to your cruelty anymore. I'm a person, not a project for you to fix. Lindsay snorted, her voice dripping with disdain. You're being dramatic. Over a few comments? Please, I turned to her, my gaze locking on hers. You've never worked a day in your life, Lindsay. And yet, for the past year, I've carried this marriage financially on my own. While your brother? Well, while your brother lies about going to work every morning. So I think I've earned the right to be dramatic. David's head snapped up. The shock was immediate, the blood draining from his face. Maria, shut up, he hissed. Or what, David? I asked. My voice still quiet. You'll lose your precious image? The one you've been so desperate to uphold? Hate to break it to you, but everyone's about to find out you haven't had a job since last fall. A heavy silence descended on the table, heavier than before. All eyes were on David now. Carol blinked, her perfectly made-up face frozen in a mask of confusion and disbelief. What is she talking about? She whispered. David stammered, his eyes darting around the table. But no words came. I leaned forward, the full force of my 7-year-long resentment fueling my words. He was fired from the city clerk's office after a massive error in the tax forms. He sent hundreds of residents incorrect invoices, some underbilled by thousands. David was in charge of the final reviews. I paused, letting the truth sink in. He didn't tell you because, well, you were too busy judging my coffee and my payslip. That's not true, David said quickly, but even he sounded unconvincing. He looked like a cornered animal. Oh, it's very true, I continued, my voice gaining strength. Since then, I've paid every single bill, every grocery run. I've covered rent, utilities, and car maintenance. And do you know how I did it? I opened a separate bank account, a secret expense account, and used my own money to cover his incompetence and his pride, while he pretended to look for jobs he was underqualified for. Aunt Sharon, who had been watching the scene unfold with quiet intensity, looked at her plate, then back at David. Is this true, David? David stood up abruptly, the sound of his chair scraping against the hardwood floor shattering the quiet. This is insane! You're trying to humiliate me! He shouted, his voice cracking. No, David, I said, my voice cutting through his. You did that to yourself when you sat there and let your mother deny me a plate like I'm the help. You humiliated yourself with your silence, not just today, but for the last year. Carol slammed her glass down, a final definitive sound. You don't talk to my son like that, and you don't talk to me like I'm disposable. I shot back. Rising to my feet, I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin manila folder. It made a soft thwack. When I placed it on the table in front of David, he stared at it, his face pale. "What is this?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. "Draft separation papers," I said, a sense of liberation coursing through me. "I've already spoken with an attorney. I'm not waiting for your permission." The room froze. Even Lindsay stopped mid-bite. The silence was no longer a sign of tension but a testament to my newfound power. "You're overreacting," Tom finally said, his voice a low growl. "You're throwing away a marriage over a single lunch." "Am I?" I turned to him, a bitter smile playing on my lips. "You think I didn't notice the way you'd sigh whenever I walked into a room? The way you'd glance at my hands like you were checking for dirt? The way you all acted like my existence was an inconvenience?" Lindsay jumped in, her voice sharp and acidic. "You're just mad because you'll never fit in with us. You never had class, Maria." I laughed then. A short, humorless burst. "And yet, I'm the only one here who knows how to pay a mortgage without begging for a handout." The words were like a physical blow. Lindsay recoiled, her face flushing with anger. I had struck a nerve, not just in her, but in all of them. Their entire sense of superiority was built on a flimsy foundation of inherited wealth and social pretense. I was the one who actually built something. I was the one who was competent. Carol shot up from her chair, her face a mask of fury. "You think this makes you superior? You're a cashier's clerk." "Accounting officer," I corrected. My voice crisp and authoritative. "At a chain that just promoted me to regional finance coordinator, and unlike your son, I actually read documents before I signed them." The promotion was real. A beacon of light in the darkness of the past year. It was my lifeboat, and I was about to use it. David pushed the folder back toward me. His hands were shaking. "You're not doing this. We can talk about this later. Please." The word please sounded foreign on his tongue. "Oh, I am," I said, a finality in my voice that even he couldn't miss. His voice cracked. "You're really going to throw away our marriage because of one lunch?" "No," I said quietly, the anger subsiding into a deep, abiding sadness. "I'm walking away because I've been treated like a stranger in my own life. Because you let them grind me down until I forgot I had options. Because your silence at this table was the loudest, most definitive answer I've ever heard." He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. And maybe he didn't. Maybe I hadn't let him. I turned to Aunt Sharon, who had been a quiet but solid presence on my left. "I'm sorry you had to witness this." She placed her napkin down gently. "Don't apologize, dear. You've shown more grace than most would in your position." She looked at Carol, her eyes hard. "And you? You should be ashamed. You humiliated your daughter-in-law in front of your entire family." "She's not my daughter-in-law anymore," Carol spat, her face contorted with rage. I nodded, a sense of peace washing over me. "And you'll never have the chance to be cruel to me again." I looked at David one last time. His eyes were wide with a desperate dawning fear. He was seeing his future crumble. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating click of a manila folder. The power was no longer his. It was mine. David's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "You really mean it? You're leaving me?" I didn't answer. I simply stood, walked to the kitchen with the quiet dignity of someone who had already said everything she needed to say, and grabbed my purse from the hook by the door. As I returned to the dining room, the table was a sea of shocked, silent faces. The food sat uneaten, a monument to the ruin I had just wrought. The silence had shifted. It was no longer one of judgment but of sheer, unadulterated disbelief. "I'll be sending the official papers this week," I said to the room at large. The words ringing with a finality that made Carol fold her arms across her chest. "Don't expect sympathy from anyone," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. But Aunt Sharon, bless her, stood up. "Actually, Carol," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I think you'll find the family feels otherwise." Carol blinked. the carefully maintained facade of her authority cracking. What do you mean? I mean, we're tired of the drama, the belittling, the cruelty masked as tradition, Sharon said, looking around the table. A few cousins nodded in agreement, their faces grim. The quiet rebellion had begun. I won't be attending your Christmas brunch this year, Carol. You can't be serious, Carol stammered, looking genuinely panicked. I am. Sharon looked around the table again. And I have a feeling I won't be the only one. I turned to leave. David tried one last time, his voice a choked plea. Maria, don't do this, please. I paused at the doorway, my back to him. The walk to my car was the quietest 10 seconds of my life. No shouting, no footsteps behind me. No last-minute apologies, just the quiet click of my heels on the driveway and the rush of August heat. I didn't cry. I didn't even look back. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my driveway now, I had already texted my lawyer. The folder was real, the conversations were real, but I hadn't expected to use them so soon. The final straw hadn't been steak. It had been silence. David's silence. That week was a blur of paperwork and iced coffee. I moved into the guest bedroom, creating a physical and emotional distance that David couldn't cross. He kept trying to play it down, to rationalize my actions. People divorce over cheating, not over a lunch, he said, his voice laced with annoyance. You're being theatrical. But something in him knew. He stopped going out, stopped pretending to job hunt. He just sat on the couch, drinking, a glazed look in his eyes. Meanwhile, I stayed busy. My new life had already begun. The promotion was official regional finance coordinator at the company's main office. Full salary bump, flexible work from home options, and a relocation package. I didn't tell David. Why should I? What I did tell him was the court date. Our mediation was scheduled for the 9th of September. I'd filed for a no-fault divorce. But under the surface, there was plenty of fault to be found. 3 days before the hearing, I got a call from Aunt Sharon. I just wanted you to know, she said. Her voice warm. You weren't the only one who saw it. What they did to you at that lunch? That was a reckoning. Apparently, word had spread fast. The cousins and other in-laws who had sat awkwardly through the meal were furious after I left. A few confronted Carol directly. Others simply left early. Sharon had shared everything with the rest of the extended family. Her words, she told me, were simple. You don't starve someone and call it hospitality. Carol and Tom had been politely uninvited from 2 upcoming weddings. Lindsay, who had once bragged that everyone wanted her at their events, hadn't received an RSVP in weeks. Reputation, it turned out, didn't come with immunity. As for David, he was unraveling. I came home one night to find him drinking on the couch, his eyes glazed over and bloodshot. The television was on, but he wasn't watching it. He was just staring into the middle distance, a ghost in his own living room. This is what you wanted, right? He slurred. A pathetic attempt to shift the blame. To burn it all down. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I just stopped pretending the ashes were flowers. The day of the mediation, he wore a suit that was a size too tight and wouldn't look me in the eye. He looked like a child playing dress-up. A man completely out of his depth. I, on the other hand, wore a navy blue dress, my hair pulled back in a neat bun, and I carried with me every single receipt, bank statement, and transfer record from the year he was unemployed. I was a professional, and I was here to do business. My lawyer didn't have to say much. The numbers spoke for themselves, a quiet but irrefutable testament to my financial burden and David's deceit. At the end of the session, David looked at me. A flicker of something real in his eyes for the first time in a long time. It was a look of pure, unadulterated shock. A silent question as if he might finally say something of substance. But instead, his pride got the better of him. I can't believe you're doing this to me, he said. The words a familiar refrain of self-pity. I stood up, my briefcase in hand. No, David, I said, looking him straight in the eye. I can't believe you did this to me. And with that, I turned and walked out of the room. When the divorce was finalized, I didn't throw a party. I went home, ordered Indian takeout, and slept for 12 hours straight. The silence, it felt different now. It was no longer a symbol of my quiet suffering. It felt earned, a victory of my own making. Weeks passed. Carol, in a transparent attempt at damage control, sent a vague apology email with phrases like, "I'm sorry if you were hurt," and, "We've all said things we didn't mean." I didn't reply. I simply archived it and moved on. The promotion meant I relocated 2 states over into a bright apartment with a southern-facing balcony and a dishwasher that didn't rattle. My new coworkers sent me plants and welcome baskets. My new manager said, "We've heard nothing but great things." It was the first time in years I'd been recognized for who I was, not who I wasn't. One night in late October, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered it. It was David. His voice was quiet, almost a ghost of his former self. "I just wanted to say I miss you," he said. I didn't answer right away. He continued, "I think we got lost. I should have said something that day. Should have stood up for you." "David," I said, a deep, tired sigh escaping my lips. "You had 7 years." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I was scared." "Of who?" "Your mother." "Of everything. My parents. Their expectations." It was a lot. There was a long pause. He was waiting for me to comfort him, to tell him it was okay, but I had no comfort left to give. "I've been thinking about coming to see you," he said. "Talk face to face." I looked out the window at my new skyline, at the city lights twinkling below me. "No need," I said. Everything I needed to hear, I heard in that dining room. The silence said it all. He didn't argue. He just let it hang there. A final, unanswerable question. Before he could say anything more, I added, "I'm not angry anymore, David. I just don't belong to that life. And it doesn't belong to me." He exhaled, a sound of defeat. "So that's it. That's it." Then I hung up. I stood in the middle of my kitchen for a few minutes, just listening. No shouting, no footsteps, no dry remarks or tapping nails. Just me, my new apartment, and a basil plant that desperately needed watering. Some things don't need to be said out loud to cut you open, and some silences, finally, heal.